2022 has been a year of unprecedented shocks. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has created four new dynamics, each with the potential to profoundly alter the course of the energy transition across our four major emitters. Number one, commodity prices. Shortages of Russian pipeline gas into European markets have sent fossil fuel prices skyrocketing. Number two, stagflation. That rising commodity price has sparked an accelerated inflation environment which is slashing growth outlooks globally. That's creating to an elongated period of stagflation. Number three, energy security. Putin's weaponization of Russian gas flows has shown the world the imperative of energy independence and the importance of safeguarding energy security. Number four, political tensions. The invasion of Ukraine has abruptly ended the peace and stability of the post-Cold War period. That's creating instability abroad, whilst an emerging cost of living crisis is creating fracas and frictions at home. We'll look at the implications of these four trends across the four major emitters: the European Union, the United States, India, and of course China. This is Beringa's State of the Transition. The United States, the world's largest economy and the de facto leader of a liberal alliance of democratic states in support of Ukraine. US emissions historically have been on a downward trajectory. The country achieved its Kyoto goals of a 17% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 on 2005 levels. It's since upgraded its ambition to a 50% reduction by 2030 and also committed to that all-important net zero target by 2050. Despite this, the US has underperformed historically on our credibility and durability methodology. The credibility axis on the x-axis looks at policy maturity, evaluating a country on its policy, legislative and regulatory agenda, evaluating whether it can achieve its net zero aims. Our durability axis on the y-axis looks at the momentum behind decarbonisation, evaluating the country's breadth and depth of political support to meet that decarbonisation target. Historically, the US has suffered from a lack of credibility because of an absence of congressional support. Without the major pieces of legislation, the verbal targets made by presidents like President Biden at COP26 has lacked credibility without the congressional and legislative support to make those targets real in policy terms. Equally, the US has underperformed on our durability axis also. The lack of cross-partisan consensus on energy and climate policy meant that the energy policy was vulnerable to changing regimes taking different courses on the energy transition. This was made manifestly obvious with the election of President Donald Trump, who pursued aggressive climate rollbacks in many areas. We've redone our credibility and durability methodology and seen rising scores in both axes. On the credibility axis, we've seen two pieces of legislation this year which have enhanced the credibility of the US decarbonisation agenda. The first, an infrastructure bill targeting funds at decarbonisation transport, most notably supplying capital to EV charging stations across major highways in the US, supporting the rollout of electric vehicles. Secondly, and more importantly, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, committing over $300 billion to decarbonisation through subsidies and investment tax credits in renewable technologies and their deployment. Analysts suggest that that bill would reduce greenhouse gases on 2005 levels by over 40% by 2030. While short of the US's 50% target by 2030, this nevertheless represents a significant step forward in the credibility of the US's decarbonisation policy. In addition, we've also seen rising scores on the durability axis. When we look at the four implications of Ukraine, we can see that the impacts on the US have been neutral in three and positive in one. When we look at the commodity prices, we see that actually the role of that has been less significant in the US. Isolated from the shortages of Russian gas in European markets, the Henry Hub gas benchmark in the US has traded well below the benchmarks in Asia and Europe, owing to the large domestic supplies of gas in the US. Secondly, the role of energy security has been much less significant. The weaponization of gas supplies in Europe has had less meaningful impact in the US, owing to the fact that the US is already energy independent thanks to the shale gas revolution of the 2010s. As a consequence, the policy implications have been less profound. Thirdly, stagflation. With that less significant commodity price increase, we've already seen inflation peak at below 10% in the US. That means that the US's growth outlook is more robust than its peers in Europe and Asia. Where we have seen major improvements is on political tensions. The passage of the Inflation Reduction Act increases the durability of the decarbonisation pathway in the US. It would now take majorities in both House and Senate, as well as the support of the incumbent president, to repeal that act. That makes the hurdle of potential climate rollbacks far greater and far higher, giving the commitments made by the administration much more durability in the international arena. The invasion of Ukraine has shown just how vulnerable and susceptible the course of the energy transition is to major macroeconomic and political events. If you'd like to understand more about the course of the energy transition and what it means for your investments and exposures, reach out to any of Baringa's experts.